Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. This is your host, Matt Kirchner. We had such great feedback on our last episode of Ask Us Anything. We had great questions, first of all, from our audience, and we had so much fun answering those questions. The interest this time around, absolutely overwhelming. We put out a request. We say, hey, there's another episode coming up. And the world of technical education, Tech Ed Nation, as we like to call it, responded in droves with fantastic questions. We've narrowed it down to a couple. Can't answer every question every single episode, but we pick the best and brightest, and we try to tackle them here on the Tech Ed Podcast. The other thing that we do is that it's not just Matt Kirchner speaking on this particular episode. Our producer, the heart of the Tech Ed Podcast, Ms. Melissa Martin, is joining us to ask the questions and respond to a few of the answers. So, Melissa, welcome back. That side of the microphone, this side of the microphone again.
Yeah.
Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here again. It's always fun.
It is always fun.
All right. So we got a number of questions again submitted. Thank you to everyone for submitting those. And I'll tell you this, because we had so many, we have to pare it back so that we can fit into our allotted time frame. So if we didn't get to your question this time around, we'll make sure to get to it next time. So again, subscribe, stay tuned. We'll do this every single quarter. And again, for anybody who you got ideas, you've got questions for us, you can always throw them in that submit your questions spot on our website, and we'll save them for next time around. But Matt, are you ready for this time's questions? All right. So the first question comes to us from Gustavo Gomez. Gustavo is a professor over at Purdue Global University. And he says, I'm working on a new course called Production Machine Technologies and Tooling. I was wondering if you have a presentation geared to that subject and anything around automation and robotics. So awesome. I'll let you rephrase that question and then answer it.
Gustavo, you said?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, Gustavo, thank you for a terrific question. Thanks for being somebody in higher education who is focusing on this really cool question about what should we be teaching in higher education when it comes to automation, robotics, machines, controls, and so on. So really, really awesome that you're thinking about it that way. So let's start with thinking about what's important in the university program when it comes to advanced manufacturing. And we've had so many guests on this podcast, folks that are working in manufacturing, who have come to us and maybe, I don't know, complaining a little bit about the whole idea that, boy, we get these engineers and these technical folks out of 4-year programs. They're smart, wicked smart. They're really, really good with numbers and data and theory, but then they're scared to death when they get out on the shop floor. And so, in answer to the first part of the question, do we have any presentations and so on? Absolutely. We've had, dozens of episodes of the podcast talking more specific terms about what we should be teaching at the university level when it comes to advanced manufacturing. So we'll link a few of those up in the show notes. But let's think about this. First of all, we've got employers that are coming to us and saying, hey, I've got engineers, for example, that are coming out of 4-year programs, and I'm just quoting them, they're no good to me for the first 2 or 3 years I have them because they haven't spent any time on the shop floor. So I would say the first thing to think about is, yes, we have to have engineering talent that understands calculus and physics and has gone deep in math. I mean, we get that. That's important. We know ABET has all kinds of requirements around that. The HLC has requirements around that. I understand all that stuff. But the truth of the matter is that if we're going to produce students who are job ready to add value in manufacturing, they've got to have that hands-on experience as well. And so lots of different ways to do that. I'll point as an example, because it's fresh in my mind, what's going on at the University of Wisconsin. Stout recently announced a huge partnership with an employer in Western Wisconsin. They are putting in all kinds of hands-on experiential learning. So they're adding, in that case, FANUC robo drills with robotic machine tending, FANUC controls, which we know we're big FANUC fans here on the Tech Ed Podcast, where students are learning hands-on technology. They're doing some things with an enterprise smart factory system, and literally learning the finer aspects of data acquisition, smart sensors and smart devices, how a PLC works, how we acquire data, what we do with that data on the cloud, how we protect data in a manufacturing operation, managed switches, unmanaged switches, all these kind of things. What is an ERP system? How do we pull data up to an enterprise level software program to be able to work with that data? And how do we integrate all these technologies, things like conveyors, and we mentioned sensors, programmable logic controllers, stepper motors, all these different technologies you see in manufacturing. It's that hands-on integration part. So I think, in any 4-year engineering program, yes, cover the theory. Let the students do some fun stuff early on. Don't save all the cool hands-on stuff for junior and senior year. But then let's really embed there some awesome hands-on projects, work-based learning, and a capstone project that requires them to put all these technologies together. There's more and more 4-year universities that are doing this now. Purdue Global is a great example of a spot where folks can get good, polytechnic education, good hands-on learning. But those are the kinds of things that I would be thinking about, is that, yeah, we can do a lot of cool stuff in the lab. We can do a lot of experimental stuff and experiential stuff, but let's also make sure we're getting good hands-on experience with authentic manufacturing equipment and technology.
And I'll just maybe ask a follow-up question, Matt. So it sounds like Gustavo's got, one course that he's working on. So if you had to boil it down to like, you've got one course to teach the most fundamental things, what would you include in that?
Yeah, so I'm going to make the assumption that the students outside of this course are getting some of that fundamental, data analytics and data acquisition and what we're doing now with AI and analysis and those kind of things. I would say it's a handful of things. I would say, first of all, let's think about that authentic manufacturing technology. So what is discrete I/O or a programmable logic controller doing? That's the computer of manufacturing. I would think specifically about things like ultrasonic sensors, proximity sensors, temperature sensors, moisture sensors, force sensors. So how are we using sensor technology at the edge? I would get that in there for sure. You're going to want to teach some basic machining or subtractive manufacturing. Sure. So you think about a machining center where you're removing metal from a part to create another part, or removing metal from a substrate. You'll definitely want to get that in. You probably want some basic metal fabrication. So what is a punch press? What is a turret press? What is a press brake? How are we fabricating metal? How are we welding metal? You're going to want to work in addition to that, like we said, conveyor technology, electric motors. You're going to want to understand electric motors, variable frequency drives, motor control, mechanical drives, which they're going to be learning some of that outside of that course, but understanding how do gears, pulleys, shafts, and so on work in a manufacturing environment. You're going to want to work in some fluid power, so hydraulics and pneumatics. That depends a little bit on which of those focuses, depends a little bit on where you are and what your employers are doing. And then the automation and robotics side. So you need to have both. A 6-axis traditional industrial robot. Everybody looks at collaboratives and says, oh, that's what everybody's using right now. 90% of the robots, probably more, that are used in manufacturing are still traditional 6-axis robots. And that's not just because that's what people have bought in the past. It's because based on precision and payload capacity, a lot of times a traditional 6-axis robot is the best application. But then we also have to teach collaborative robotics as well. So I think those would be the basic elements that I would place into that program. Look, I recognize at the 4-year level, a lot of times we're constrained in terms of budget. Our community and technical colleges many times for equipment are better funded than our 4-year universities, but those are the kinds of technologies we have to start building around, if for no other reason that's what our students are going to see when they get to manufacturing, and that's what employers are expecting students to know.
100%. Your employers will get behind you 100% when they hear that that's the kind of course you're going to put your engineering students through. Absolutely. All right, the next question comes to us from Michael McArdle over at Western Technical College. And Michael asks, students use AI but do not question the results. What are some strategies to have them see the futility of that approach?
Yeah, well, so I guess the first thing is, if looking back to all of our education journeys, don't be afraid to tell them they're wrong, right? I mean, if I answered a question, whether people long before AI, whether I did it in the classroom or outside of the classroom, regardless of how I did my research, if that answer was wrong, my teachers weren't afraid to say, "Look, that's nice try, but you're wrong there." So let's start with not being afraid to call that out. The truth of the matter is, accuracy is important. It's important in the workforce and in the workplace, and it should be important and often is in education as well. But I go back, Melissa, too. I had a 6th grade teacher, and Mr. Schumann, his name was. And one of the things that we were required to do during 6th grade, and you got extra points. And this is back in the days of newspapers and magazines and whatever. Nobody was going online and looking for anything back then. You got extra points if you could find an error in a news article.
Really?
And bring it in. You got extra credit for that.
Wow.
So when you were, and believe it or not, it happened quite often. I mean, this has been the days of typeset and you didn't have spell check and so on. About once a week, if you read the paper often enough, you'd find a mistake in an article.
Yeah.
Either a factual mistake or a grammatical mistake or a spelling mistake, and you bring it in and get extra credit. Challenge students to find where generative AI is wrong. Generative AI isn't perfect. We know that. It hallucinates. It's getting better. I was just listening to a podcast. It was a Joe Rogan podcast, actually, with Jensen Huang from NVIDIA. But they were talking about how AI and generative AI is hallucinating less and less and less, which is why people are using it more and more and more. It's just becoming more and more accurate. But I would say have a student, just understand that you can't just take what that generative AI is telling you and take that as fact. And I've gotten myself into trouble when I'm doing quick research for the podcast or something, and you jump on, I won't embarrass any of the platforms because they all do this, but it gives you a wrong answer. You write it down and all of a sudden you use it. And then, 10 listeners are commenting on whatever saying you got this wrong. So at any rate, you can't just rely on on generative AI to give you the right answer. I would also, so challenge students to find it making mistakes and point out when it's making mistakes. Also let them know that they're responsible for their answers. They can't just blame generative AI for that answer. Use a transformer, use a GPT that gives you its sources. Several of them do. So you can actually go through, and if it says something, it'll go back and it'll show you its source material for whatever it was telling you. Use that. But then the other part of it is we've got to put the challenge to teachers and educators and say, look, in this age of generative artificial intelligence, you've got to step up your game, and you've got to find new ways to challenge students, whether it's talking about material, whether it's, rather than asking them to write a report outside of class, maybe they come in and they write a report inside of class, or you have them read an article and then they have to come in and tell you a little bit about what they learned using generative AI as an assistant, but not as the source material. And then I think the other thing is just for students, it's time for them to step up their game. So we can raise the bar on students. Doing research is way easier than it used to be. I mean, I'm not to sound like an old guy, but I remember, we used to have to go to the library, find a book, and then, like, if you were writing a term paper, take the book over to the copy machine, make copies of the book, or do your research in the library, and then take all that home and write your term paper. I mean, think about that. And that's not like 300 years ago. That was like 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
That was when I was in college. I mean, hours and hours and hours of reading all these reference materials so that you could write your paper and be well informed from, these different authors who had different things to say about that topic. It's a lot of research to do.
Absolutely. So now using AI, you can literally collapse what used to be maybe a semester to write a 20-page research paper you could do that in a day. So, okay, step up the game, set expectations higher. We have to find different ways to challenge students. We have to have them explain more about what they're learning, more group projects, all these kind of things, not just, replacing rote memorization with the use of generative artificial intelligence. So it is okay to expect more of your students, and the best educators and the best educational institutions are going to be doing that as the years go on in the age of artificial intelligence.
That's absolutely right. And I would add to that, students need to understand these AI tools as they're designed to give you an answer. Whereas a person, you ask them a question, they don't know the answer. They're going to tell you, hopefully, I don't know the answer to that, but let's look it up together. Here's where you might be able to find the solution. And AI isn't made to say, I don't know. It's if it doesn't know the answer, it will hallucinate. And that's what it'll make something up just to give you an answer. And so students need to understand that when they're using these AI tools, that they're designed to give you an answer, whether or not it's right. Because that's just how they're programmed. So just set that expectation with them as well, so they understand what these tools are for and what they're not for.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great points. All right. So that kind of segues into another question, because there's this whole ethical debate around AI and, what's right and wrong and how much do we use it. And Holly Atha over at the MBA Research and Curriculum Center asks a question. She says, what role do you feel ethics education should play in CTE today and tomorrow?
Yeah, I love that question. And a huge role is the short answer for a whole collection of reasons. I mean, let's start with our last question about how students use AI for their coursework and so on. Recognizing that you've got to be doing your own work, that you don't take credit for somebody else's work. These kind of things, really, really important ethical questions. But it gets a lot deeper than that. You start thinking about in the age of artificial intelligence, where computers are able to, at least on the technical side, think as fast as humans can and faster and know more and access more data and so on. What does it mean to be truly human is a really, really strong question. When we start having agentic AI making all our decisions for us, and we could easily get to that point, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human in an age where we don't have to work as many hours because we can use AI, robotics, and automation to do a lot of the things that we used to have to do physically, to where anybody today can pretty much have within reach is the lifestyle of the wealthiest person 100 years ago, right? Like anybody today can have the lifestyle of somebody that was like the wealthiest person on earth 100 years ago. And that's just gonna continue. So we'll have all these questions about what does it mean to have a soul? What does it mean to be human? How does that mean in terms of how we treat each other? How does that mean in terms of how we use artificial intelligence? We go back oftentimes on this podcast to the book Genesis, which was Henry Kissinger, Eric Schmidt, as you know, and Craig Mundy, and they published that book about a year ago, give or take. And it's just an outstanding book, but they go deep into the exploration of ethics in the age of artificial intelligence and technology. So I think I think ethics plays a huge role. Well, you can weave it into the coursework. You can force students to think about ethical questions. I go back a lot of times. I was a business school major, but I went to a Jesuit university, and we were required to study 9 credits in theology and 9 credits in philosophy. And you really, it didn't really. People would look at that and say, well, that has nothing to do with being a business person. Well, maybe, but what you learn in terms of how to think about humanity, how you communicate, really, really important stuff. And so we're going to have tools at our disposal in the future that can be used for all kinds of purposes. And people are like, aren't you worried about AI being used for really, really bad purposes? And the answer is, well, as long as people of good conscience are using it and as smart or smarter than the people that are bad actors, the better off we're going to be. But we need to weave that element of ethics into the coursework. For sure.
All the more reason to include it now with AI and everything. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So next question comes from Bob Manning over at Stillwater Area High School. And Bob has a fantastic question. It's a little bit long, so stay along for the ride. He says, "Hi, Matt. Many schools would love to have the manufacturing programming that you highlight in your podcast. However, we all have different starting points and assets. Elements of quality programming that come to mind include visionary and strategic leadership, physical space with modern equipment and infrastructure, genuine industry partners, teacher capabilities and buy-in, funding options, etc. What do you think are the most important components a high school must have when attempting to build a robust manufacturing pathway for the sustainable future? Can you also rank them in order of importance, or would it make the most sense to list what needs to come first, second, and so on?"
All right. Great question.
It's a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I spend a lot of time with educators, and I think kind of the default playbook a lot of times is they all go to money, right? And I say all, I mean, I use that figuratively, but everybody comes back and says, well, until somebody walks in the door with $1 million, until we have a referendum that gives me, $5 million to spend, until I have a school board, until I have a superintendent, a district administrator, the list goes on, that provides me the resources to be able to expand my program. Until I have those things, I really don't have anything to do here because I couldn't afford to do it anyway. And, the first thing we always, and this would be number 1 on the list, is before anybody's going to give you a penny, you have to have a dream. And, we've been involved in so many of these amazing K-12 projects and at other levels of education as well. But lots of high school programs where we're integrating all kinds of fascinating, amazing technology, autonomous vehicles, drones, flying drones, unmanned ground vehicles, 3D design and fabrication, coding, programming. I mean, all these really, really cool things. I think when Bob says the kind of programs we highlight on the podcast, I think that's what he's pointing to. Totally. All this really cool technology, robotics, automation, mechatronic systems, all those things cost money. There's no question about it. But if we start by saying we'll work on this when we have the money, then that never happens, right? What we have to do is have a dream that is so big that somebody's willing to fund it. And every one of these projects that I've seen whether it's a community or an employer or a wealthy individual or some combination usually of all 3 of those, stand up and say, we're going to do this, it's because someone had a dream so big that they couldn't say no to it. So First thing I would say is start with a dream. Think about what could be. If you could have the coolest lab, the best program, regardless of what that would cost, what would that look like?
Yeah.
And then create a message so compelling that nobody can say no. From there, I think I'm a huge believer in meeting every learner where they are. And I think this is really important, especially as we move into the future of education, is that we all have different learning modalities. We talk about that all the time on the podcast. I sometimes take this back to my days of selling manufacturing technology and so on. It's like you'd always say, well, some people are auditory learners, or some people are kinesthetic, and some people are visual. So in other words, some people learn with their ears, some with their eyes, some by doing. Not right, wrong, good, bad. It's just that we're all different. So how do you meet every single learner where they are? You have to have various modalities of learning, whether that's a lecture, whether it's hands-on learning, whether it's e-learning, whether it's work-based learning. All those things are great ways to learn. We have to have that. Number 3, I'm a believer as part of that you create some opportunity for asynchronous learning. I think we're getting away from the age of a teacher standing in front of a class and lecturing for an hour and then moving the class on to the next classroom and lecturing for an hour. That version of education was never for me. And so having opportunities where we take our high flyers, and if they can move faster, let them go. And if a student, for whatever reason, needs a little bit more time on something, that's awesome. Just take the time that you need to be able to gain the competency. So I think that's really important, is delivering asynchronous learning, and then making sure we've got a significant portion of that that's hands-on, and that it's project-based. And that's, I think, where the future of education is going. And that puts a challenge on a teacher, right? Managing a classroom full of students working on projects all day might be better for the student. It's probably a lot harder for the teacher. Thank God for teachers that are willing to be patient enough to work through something like that. We need to have hands-on learning, and the more technical and the more technology driven, the better. So that would be number 3. And then the fourth one is, and all these tie together, but you got to have skills and competencies that lead to whatever comes next. And, a lot of times I think that's career-based stuff, right? So, manufacturers who walk into a high school that wants to, spend a bunch of money on a new lab, that can't see a direct line from whatever that is, a vinyl cutter sitting in the corner to a job at that employer. It's really, really hard to get them excited about that. So, and I'm all for, there's a lot of different age appropriate and grade appropriate ways to deliver learning. And we're not taking 6th graders and teaching them complex ladder logic on a programmable logic controller, right? That comes later. But teaching students at the right level, here's how to program a robot. Here's how to operate a robot. Here's how to program a programmable logic controller. Here's how you get data into and out of smart sensors. Here's what you do with a data set. Here's how you weld a part. Here's how you fabricate a part. Here's how you machine a part. Here's how you program a CNC machine. Having those kinds of programs in a high school so that students are learning those competencies along the way, and then have job-ready skills tied to, and this would be number 5, certifications wherever we can. So third-party certifications that students can earn, that they can take to an employer and say, I know how to do this. This is what I learned in high school, creating a competency portfolio in addition to that high school diploma would be. And I could keep going. I could come up with another probably list of 10 for Bob, but those would be my top 5.
All right. So to recap for Bob and everyone else in our audience, and to make sure that I was listening. Mm-hmm. So our 5 were: have a dream so big that people can't say no to it. Yep. 2 would be meet every learner where they are. Yep. 3 would be asynchronous, hands-on, project-based learning. 4 is make sure that it's career relevant and ties to something that they're going to see after school. And number 5 ties to certifications and that they're earning something along the way.
You could be a podcast host.
I could be a podcast host.
Now you just have to segue into the next question in a way that's perfectly smooth.
So my segue is that the next question has nothing to do with anything we're talking about. So we're going to take a quick break from the technical education and workforce topics and go to kind of an unrelated topic. If you've been around the Tech Ed podcast for a while, you'll know that sometimes we have really unique, fun episodes that kind of dive into topics outside of the classroom, but really we always find a way to make it work within the greater technical education, data, skills, science, all that kind of fun stuff.
It's a Tech Ed STEM podcast about whatever we think is interesting.
Exactly. And so you did a really fun episode over the summer previewing the Tour de France.
Yeah, with Jason Gay from the Wall Street Journal.
Exactly.
Yep,
so we actually had somebody ask a question about that. So Bruce Anthony reaches out and he says, do you think Tadej Pogačar will win the 2026 Tour de France? Follow-up question, who will be the next rider to win the yellow jersey competition not named Tadej?
Wow. Yeah, that's an awesome question from Bruce. The answer to his first question is yes. So the thing to know about cycling, like any sport, there's a lot of wild cards, right? Yeah. But if you stay healthy and you don't crash, right, those are kind of the two big things. Then I think, if Tadej makes it through the Tour without a significant crash, if he's as healthy next year as he was this year, no reason to believe he won't be. I don't know that there's anybody that can touch him. He ran away with the 2025 Tour de France. I think Jonas Vingegaard still has a few years left in him, and he was Tadej's, and has been his kind of most aggressive rival over the course of the last several years, 5-6 years or so. I think Jonas has a chance, and it really depends on what his conditioning is coming into the Tour next year. But if he rides at the highest level that Jonas can ride at, I think he's got a chance to at least make it a competitive Tour. Yeah. My bet would still be on Tadej Pogačar. Next one, not named Tadej to win the Tour. If it's not Jonas, there's a lot of people I'll highlight too. Remco Evenepoel has been one that we had our eye on last year. And I would say that he is still, if you look at the rankings of the top 10 or 20 riders in the world, Remco is still right there. And the other one I'll add is a little bit of a wild card because I have a soft spot in my heart for him, would be Matteo Jorgensen, American rider. Okay. He's probably not top 10, but he's probably top 15 right now. And as we talked about on the podcast, actually, our son who raced for the junior development team for Trek bicycles for a whole bunch of years when he was growing up, actually raced against Matteo at junior nationals a couple times. So, and got beat pretty handily by Matteo, I should say. But it would to be, be at the starting line with a guy that eventually is competitive for the Tour was a really, really cool thing to look back on and think about. So Matteo Jorgensen, Bruce would also be on that list, and hard to believe we're almost 6 months away, a little bit more than that, from next year's Tour. So it won't be long before we're handicapping bike racing. Maybe Jason will come back again this year and
some
next
more
year.
predictions.
And if it's not Jason, I'll guarantee some high profile cycling expert that we'll have join us, because that was a really fun episode. Yeah, that was a fun one, and did some great tying back into science, the nutrition science data, all the data that goes into preparing these teams. So it was Mechanical
great.
drives, technology on the bike,
all that
electronic
stuff.
shifting, all that.
Totally.
You bet. Getting me excited already.
All right. So back to our education topic. So the next question comes from Michael Lezecki, and he asks, educational institutions are less tuned into dashboards. Can you suggest some good dashboard metrics for workforce development programs in education?
Oh, that's a good one.
You love metrics.
And he's right. That premise, less tuned into dashboards. So we think about, we love metrics. You think about data in manufacturing, what gets measured improves. Everything's about data. Everything's about metrics. And I would just say, to kind of introduce the answer to that question, having been involved in a lot of these projects where we've got manufacturing companies, private employers that are funding workforce or technical skills training programs at their high schools, for example, technical community colleges as well. That's one of the questions they'll ask as they're writing that check is, okay, what are we going to measure? How do we know we're successful? Yeah. And so you can make a list. We'll talk about it here in a moment. The thing that's interesting, though, is 6 months later, a year later, when that employer comes back and says, we wrote that check for $1 million, how are we doing? A lot of times, in fact, most times, the educators are surprised that they're asking. And I don't know. I won't make any judgments about that. Education versus industry. People can draw their own conclusions. But I will tell you that if you are partnering, almost to that earlier question from Bob, if you're partnering with a private employer and they're writing a check, and part of the expectation is that we're going to create the next generation of workforce, that we're going to get young people excited about careers in manufacturing, that we're going to have people graduating from those programs and going on to related programs in higher education or coming to workforce and working in manufacturing, and those are the expectations that have been laid out. Yeah. Those employers are going to expect you to hit them. And so expect that conversation, and they won't let you off the hook. They don't do that in manufacturing. If you say in manufacturing, we're going to increase throughput to this, or we're going to get our revenue number to that, or we're going to get our gross profit margin to this, and that's a goal, you set that goal and you come back and maniacally measure that. If a manufacturing employer or a private employer sets a goal for a school and you jointly agree to that, expect them to come back and ask about whether or not we got there, because they're going to. So measure that all the time. Here are some of the metrics now that we've got that topic introduced. The first one is how many students are participating in the program, right? So if we put together a manufacturing or work-based learning program, or a work-based skills program, I should say, in a high school, how many students are signing up for that course? How many students are completing that course? That's going to be a key metric. Almost every one of these now has third-party credentials tied to it. So yes, the students are earning credit in the school. They may be earning dual credit at a technical college or a university related to the coursework that they're doing, and they're earning a third-party certification. And there's lots of them out there. We talk a lot here about Manufacturing Skills Standards Council, the Smart Automation Certification Alliance. The two are my favorite. NOCTI is right up there as well. So those are just some examples. But if we're tying third-party credentials, how many students are earning those credentials? What credentials are they earning? And then it's going to be about, all right, how many of them are working in manufacturing during the summer in between the school year? How many of them are choosing careers in manufacturing or choosing manufacturing related coursework beyond secondary if they're going on to a technical community college or university? So those would be the ones that would be on my list. I would certainly think about how many students are participating and what certifications are they earning, and where are they going after that program, after high school. Those are probably the three biggest that employers are going to want to look at.
Perfect. So expect to have those metrics if you're getting money from a private donor. It's the same thing like you have to report back on your grants.
Mm-hmm.
You get money from the government or from something, you have to report back on how that grant money is being used.
Right.
It's the same thing here.
Yep. And you'll get follow-ups too. So it's not enough to just answer the question, or sometimes you get a little bit of the bobbing and weaving. I'm not trying to paint these employers as mean-spirited or what have you. It's just that they're metric driven. That's why they're in manufacturing.
If you think about it, if you put some of your money into an investment portfolio and then you don't find out how it's performing,
right,
you're going to take that money right back out. You're not interested in continuing to invest. And it's kind of, they're looking for a return on their investment in terms of the skilled workforce coming out, students interested in manufacturing careers as one example. And if you do give them really great metrics and show them the benefit of their investment, the upside is they're going to continue to invest.
Got it. Yep. That's a great analogy. Awesome.
Okay. So I'm going to keep on this kind of concept of employers, workforce, and certifications with a question from Brian Badura. And Brian says, higher education is at a tipping point with more flexibility than ever before to complete degree and certificate programs. How do we help employers understand the value of these new educational choices when many HR teams and executives may not understand how to integrate educational programs like 3-year degrees or advanced certifications into their job descriptions in the workforce?
Yeah. So awesome question from Brian. We'll take half a step back and really, he has some really good examples like, 3-year degrees and certifications and so on. First, a little in defense of employers, partnering with education, as important as it is never, it's just never at the top of their list. And the reason for that is that they're trying to manage a workforce. They're trying to keep customers happy. So think about somebody in human resources, the stuff they're dealing with all day. It might be a discipline issue one day. It might be an attendance issue another day. It might be somebody quit their job and you need to fill that job, or you got a big project and you need to staff that up, or, you've got a regulatory audit, or their days are filled with all this kind of stuff. People in manufacturing are trying to crank orders out. They're trying to meet lead times. They're trying to improve quality. They're trying to expedite orders, solve a quality issue that already got out in the field. That's the day of a manufacturing person. So in defense of them, they've got their own priorities that they're working through. But the short answer to Brian's question is 7 times 7 different ways. We talk about that all the time here on the podcast. It's not enough to tell somebody something once. I can tell you, boy, somebody should sometime ask me a list of my greatest frustrations in working in education and manufacturing. Near the top of the list, Melissa, is the number of people in HR functions that don't understand the value of third-party credentials. And, they obsess about wanting more people to come into manufacturing. They obsess about wanting more people to fill their workforce, to enroll in technical college programs or community college programs that are related. But then they don't take the time to value and understand what's available to them. And I'll just give not a little bit of a calm rant right now. You hear a lot of folks say we need more skilled people. I just had a meeting like this. I won't say the state. I was in another state within the last few weeks talking to an owner of a major manufacturing company.
Yeah.
And they were just like, yeah, we're not seeing the people coming out of the technical college program that's related to the work that we do. It's in manufacturing. And they're like,
Okay.
we're just not producing enough people. And then I've sat in the same room with that same company as they're telling their employers, well, all we really want is people that will show up to work every day, stay off of drugs, and take direction. And I'm like, and they're telling their educators that. So if I said employers, I meant to say educators. You can't have it both ways,
No.
right? You can't. And this whole idea, I'm the biggest believer in soft skills. Yes, we need people that understand professional behavior, workplace behavior. Just wrote a magazine column on that for Gardner Business Media, get published in January of 2026. Yes, we need that, but we can't simultaneously say that that's all we're looking for and then complain when we're not getting skilled talent from our educational institutions. So there's just a lot of things that I think are happening in education, a lot of trends like third-party credentials, like 3-year baccalaureate degrees, and that's that's something that's definitely on the way. It's a hot topic in my home state of Wisconsin, and it'll be a controversial one. So that's not going to be a heavy lift, especially for public institutions, but it's coming. But what we need to tell those HR folks every opportunity we have them, what's available in education, what's happening in third-party credentialing, what's happening in innovation, what's happening in hands-on learning. I mean, there's all of these great things that are happening in education, what's happening with teaching authentic industrial skills. So if I'm a machining company and I need machining talent, I need to be teaching that technology, like we said before, in the classroom, in the lab, in the high school, getting students excited about it, credentialing them, sending them direct to workforce, sending them to a technical community college program where they can build those skills. And that's how we create the next generation of the workforce. So there's no easy answer to Brian's question other than, like anything, when we say 7 different ways, you can tell somebody something once and it may not sink in. In fact, it usually doesn't. Once they hear it 7 times through 7 different modes, we talk about email, social media, traditional media, having a conversation, doing a site visit, sitting in a meeting, same message over and over and over again. Sometimes people say, it seems like sometimes on the podcast, you make the same points week in and week out. That's on purpose.
You remember those points, though.
Exactly. You got, thank you for listening. And it obviously worked because he caught that.
Yeah.
It's 7 times 7 different ways.
Awesome. Yes, I don't have anything to add. That's just absolutely true. Okay, so we've got time for one more question.
All right.
And this is actually with a future guest of the Tech Ed podcast. And we're going to end on an AI question.
I love AI questions.
Just get so many AI questions. Yes. We love it. It's such a great topic. Okay, so Pete Dolcomera, he says AI is about to outthink us in almost every technical domain. The real advantage will be in what makes us human, such as EQ, adaptability, creativity, courage, judgment, wisdom, ethics, and so on. So what's going to take to blow up the old model of technical education and rebuild around the skills machines can't copy so our workforce doesn't just survive the AI era, but thrives in it?
Yeah, it was a great question. And I think there's a key word in the first sentence, which is technical, right? Reread that first. I want to make sure that sinks in with the audience because reread that question.
AI is about to outthink us in almost every technical domain.
So when we say technical domain, it's not going to outthink us in every domain. It's going to outthink us in every technical domain. And there's actually some debate about how soon that happens.
Right.
And we'll see. I mean, some people would tell you it's going to happen in 18 months. Others are saying it might be more like 10 years. Nobody knows for sure. But certainly if anybody who's watched the advancements, not just of generative AI and what we're capable of doing with Perplexity, Claude, Meta, ChatGPT, and so on, Gemini, and seeing just how that's advanced in the last year and a half. It's incredible, right? So it's anybody's guess how quickly this is going to extend itself to physical AI in the rest of the world. I think it's a really, really good question. What happens in an age where a computer can answer any question? What happens when a computer can or AI can program a CNC machine? What happens in an age where AI can program a logic controller, can write any code, can, fill in the blank? We're already seeing now where some of the opportunities for computer science majors, especially ones new to the workforce, and data science majors and so on, struggling a little bit to find jobs, or at least jobs that pay what they want them to pay, because there's so much of this can be done with AI. Every single day, there's another article in the Wall Street Journal about what AI is doing to the workforce. Another one just this morning, as a matter of fact. I think his premise is a good one, which is we're going to get to this point before too long, before AI can do even more than it's doing now, and that is going to have a huge disrupting impact on the workforce. And so what do we need to do to our technical programs, technical education, and I'll add STEM programs to make sure that we are future ready in those programs? I think a lot of things that we need to do, we're already doing in education. Not enough educators doing it. We've talked on this podcast a number of times how AI education is mandatory in China. It's not in the U.S. And even when it is, when we're teaching it, a lot of times it's just teaching GPTs and prompt engineering, which is fine. But there's so much more to AI when it comes to applied artificial intelligence, humanoid robots, quadrupeds, drone technology, 3D design and fabrication, some of the coding, programming, video game development, autonomous vehicles, applications for battery technology, electrical vehicles, biomimicry. I mean, all of these things are changing the entire way that we engineer, the way that we design, the way that we innovate. And so we have to prepare students with the kinds of skills that will be relevant in that age. There's schools doing this, right? We talked not too long ago with the CEO of Ashley Furniture, Todd Wanek, and not long before that with the superintendent of the White House School District, Mike Bigley, about applied artificial intelligence learning, about how we can put students through an e-learning course that helps them understand applied AI and what we call the edge to cloud continuum. And this is where I think we're getting to the core of Pete's question is you have to teach how, and this is nothing new to our audience, but sensors at the edge communicate with control systems, communicate with regional data centers, data collectors, computer networks, communicate with the cloud, and what is happening at every single level of what we call the edge to cloud continuum. Because AI isn't about just what the algorithm is doing and what's happening at the cloud level, what's happening, behind the iPhone, if you will. It's how we're gathering data, extracting data, analyzing data, discerning data, storing data, what we're doing with it, and then how we use that to improve literally every aspect of the economy, whether it's energy, defense, hospitality, retail, manufacturing, smartphones. Every single aspect of our economy, precision agriculture, it's changing everything. So we have to turn our students into systems thinkers when it comes to AI and how they're analyzing every single thing they look at as far as that edge to cloud continuum. That's happening already in technical colleges. We're doing a number of projects where we're doing cloud-based analysis on data that's been pulled off of manufacturing equipment across an entire technical college. We have things like that going on at Gateway Technical College in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and there's a couple other great examples of how we're doing that at the technical college level, at the high school level. The whole idea of Discover AI, and full disclosure, I think people know we have a financial interest in that effort, but discovering how artificial intelligence manifests itself across the entire economy. That's what this is about. That's how we blow up education. I mean, if Pete wants to see some really cool stuff, go to an emerging technology lab, go to a Discover AI lab, see where you walk in the door and you've got, 3 students working on drones and another 3 working on autonomous vehicles, another 3 working on, 3D design and 3D scanning, 3 more are building their own video game. They're earning competency credentials and creating that competency portfolio the whole way through, kind of stringing through a bunch of themes we've had on this episode of the Tech Ed podcast. That is the future of education, and we can do it at every level. It's asynchronous, it's student driven, meets every student where they are, and it prepares the workforce of the future. I think Pete asked a really, really good question, and it was one I was happy to answer.
So if that's the future of technical education, that's going to be a really, really exciting time. And I think a great way to end this episode as we wrap up 2025, look forward to 2026, think about what the year ahead holds for technical education. I think that there's a lot. It can feel overwhelming to educators, but I think that there's a once in a lifetime opportunity for us in the world of education if we can embrace the change and really do it for our students and for the right reason. Because if we don't, we're doing our students a disservice for their future. So I'm excited about 2026.
Yeah,
I don't know about you.
It's going to be amazing. Yeah. In fact, speaking of being excited about 2026, we've got some really cool episodes teed up, right? A predictions episode, which we do every year.
Yeah, that's coming out next week. You guys love our predictions episode. And in case you don't know, every single year, Matt makes predictions about what the future will hold for that year. And he always ranks himself on how well he did the previous year. And you have a pretty good rating for how you've done
last
so
few
far.
years. Yeah, we'll see how we did this year. I have an inkling that we were pretty solid this
I,
year.
I have an inkling as well. So, yeah, excited to release that next one to our audience. So if you aren't subscribed, make sure you subscribe. That one comes out next week, Tuesday.
Wow, awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
super excited for that. Any other episodes coming up that the audience should be thinking about?
There are, but I'll just say you have to say subscribe because we got some really high profile guests coming out in early January. So make sure that you're subscribed. We're on Apple, Spotify, any other podcast platform that you might be listening to. If you're only listening to this, by the way, we're on YouTube. And so if you like watching rather than listening, you can go find us on YouTube, watch those episodes there. If you're watching us on YouTube, hi, it's great to see you. And you can always catch us again on Apple, Spotify, or wherever else. Tell your friends.
Awesome. Please tell your friends.
Yeah.
Glad to be here with my friend Melissa Martin. We had a great conversation. She does such a wonderful job of pitching those questions up and responding to the answers as well. Always a lot of fun. We'll keep teeing up these episodes of Ask Us Anything, so be sure to keep sending your questions our way. We'll get through as many of them as we possibly can. Can never hit on all of them, but love to pull the best and brightest and kick them around here on the Tech Ed Podcast at least once every 3 months or so. So thank you to our audience for being with us. It's been a wonderful episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. Don't forget to check out the show notes. We referenced a few things we promised to link up for folks that ask those great questions and the folks that listen to the answers as well. So check out the show notes. Those will be at techedpodcast.com/ask-us-anything. That's techedpodcast.com/ask-us-anything, where you will find loaded up not just this episode, but every episode of Ask Us Anything. So you can go back if you like this format and check those out. When you're done checking those out, check us out as well on social media. You'll find us on Instagram. We are on LinkedIn. We are on TikTok, on Facebook, anywhere you go for your social media, and on YouTube, by the way, as well. You can check us out there. Make your comments there as well. But please comment, reach out, let us know you're out there. We would love to hear from you. Thanks for being with us on this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. For our producer, Melissa Martin, my name is Matt Kirchner. I'm your host. We'll see you next week.